Okay, today we're going to talk about Charles Darwin and his voyage on what we know as the Beagle. So let's talk about Darwin first. Okay, so first off, Charles Darwin is known as the father of evolution. So he proposed that evolution shows how species change over time by a process called natural selection. Now, he was originally a naturalist. Basically, what he did is he went around and he identified species and he tried to actually find a taxonomy guide. And so he collected a lot of evidence to support his ideas and his theory of of evolution based by natural selection. No, Charles Darwin did not start his life out going, "Hey, I hope I can break through and find this new theory that's going to change the world and be controversial for the next 100 years." That's not what he started to do. He basically went on a ship called the Beagle. And so the HMS Beagle basically was going to travel around to South America, and he was approached by its captain, Robert Fitzroy, and he was asked to be the naturalist. Darwin was only 22 years old, fresh out of the college, and he was so excited to have this life experience to go on to the Beagle. And so he went on as their naturalist. So basically what his job was to take observations of species that he saw, such as plants and animals, and even to collect specimens of them, draw images of them. So that's what his job was as they were traveling around South America. And so he had a lot of great experiences as he went through his voyage in South America. So what did Darwin observe? First off, he observed tropical rainforests, which he had never seen before. He found out there was a great diversity of species in there, not just plants, but also animals. And so it was a great experience for him to see all these new things in the tropical rainforest that he never saw before. He also experienced his first earthquake, which was crazy because he didn't know earthquakes existed before because he's never felt one, but he did experience an earthquake. He also found fossilized seashells in a mountain range, way above sea level, which he couldn't explain how they got there because they were nowhere near an ocean or somewhere where he thought they should be. He also found rock ledges that were once beaches that had gradually built up over time, showing that we had a steady process of what we know as a rock cycle now, but Earth's surface changing. He also dug up fossils of giant extinct mammals, such as the ground sloth. He found evidence of these organisms and how they looked very different today as they did in past. So we have a picture here of an ancient armadillo, example of a fossil that he found, which looks much different than a modern armadillo, which we find here. He did his biggest discoveries, though, on the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands are about 500 miles off the coast of Ecuador, and they're a group of small islands that are actually fairly new and recent. And we say that because they were created by volcanic activity. And so most of the animals on the Galapagos Islands are found nowhere else in the world. And so when he was going through the rainforest, he didn't see these islands there on the or see these animals on the mainland, but he found them in the islands there. But as he looked, they looked like the species living in South American mainland, but they had some distinct differences. He also found out there were some distinct differences between the species on the islands themselves, which was definitely different. And so, for an example, he found tortoises. And here we got 3 different tortoises that are found on 3 different islands within the Galapagos. All these tortoises have different shells. Now remember, a tortoise is different than a turtle. Tortoises are actually much larger, can be much larger, and live only on land. But as we can see, these giant tortoises have very distinct differences in their shells. He not only found them in tortoises, but he found them in a bird called a finch. When Darwin was going through the Galapagos, this was a huge thing because he had 14 species of finches that he found on the different islands. But when you went to the mainland, you only had 1 species of finch. Well, he couldn't explain this, of why they were so different. And so some differences, they had different beaks. They had completely different foods which they ate. He saw that these birds were able to survive and reproduce. They passed their genes on. And basically the gene they're passing on is the beak. What their beak is specific for is food sources. And over time we saw definite selection in these different types of beaks. So this was Darwin's first clue, hey, this isn't right. Something's different. Why is this happening? And so he started questioning why all these finches have these different beaks, which he definitely could not explain any of these beaks. Other than it was just they had different food sources, but he didn't quite know why they were different. And so here we have an example of Darwin's different beak sources. So you can see here we have them based on what they eat. And so you have your seed eaters, which are going to have your shorter, fatter beaks. Your cactus flower eaters, which had elongated beaks so they could get in to get the nectar from the flowers without getting poked. We have our bud eaters, which have a shorter beak, and then our insect eaters, which have a variety of beaks as well, from short to very long, depending on where their insect was actually located at. And we can see all the way at the bottom of this, we have by the way, this is a phylogenetic tree. We have a common ancestor for this, and this common ancestor is going to be the finch found on the mainland. Well, it looks very different than the other finches. Note that we don't just have a difference in the finch's beak shape, but we also have a coloration difference of the finch itself. And so we have everything from a brown finch, which looks like the coloration of the mainland, to a black, to a almost white or off-white looking finch. These colorations are also an adaptation to allow the finch to survive in different areas of the Galapagos itself and blend in kind of like camouflage into those specific areas. And so the finches were one of the most documented birds that we had from Charles Darwin. So let's go with